time. This is live television to put our f***ing beef behind us. Katt, I want to move on. Can we move on, man? Can we move on?
What if the most shocking moment in comedy history wasn't a roast, but a handshake? After more than a decade of public insults, $5 million challenges, and nonstop war between Katt Williams and Kevin Hart, something completely unexpected happened on live television. In front of millions of viewers, the same man who called Kevin a Hollywood puppet suddenly stepped forward and shook his hand. But here's the part that doesn't add up. The energy wasn't peace. The body language wasn't brotherhood. And the timing? Almost too perfect for a coincidence. It felt staged, controlled, like every second was designed for cameras, headlines, and public perception. And then Dave Chappelle, sitting in the crowd, didn't even react like everyone else. No applause, no excitement, just a quiet smirk, like he already understood the game being played. Because in Hollywood, nothing is ever just emotional. Every hug has meaning, every apology has weight, and every forgiveness moment might actually be a strategic move hidden in plain sight. So now the real question hits harder than the feud itself. Was Katt Williams finally making peace with Kevin Hart? Or did he just walk straight into the most carefully designed psychological trap of his career? And more importantly, who really won that night? The man who forgave, or the man who controlled the narrative? What unfolded on that stage didn't feel like a simple reunion. It felt like a pressure chamber that had been slowly building for over a decade finally cracking open in front of a live audience. Katt Williams didn't arrive like a man coming to make peace. He arrived like someone stepping into enemy territory, knowing every camera, every light, and every angle was waiting to capture a single mistake. The same man who had spent years labeling the system as fake suddenly stood inside its most polished celebration, surrounded by its biggest names, its loudest applause, and its most carefully curated energy. And across from him stood Kevin Hart, the symbol of success, discipline, and industry dominance, smiling like he already understood how the moment would be remembered. But underneath that smile wasn't just confidence. It was timing, control, awareness. Because Kevin Hart doesn't just perform on stage. He manages perception. Every pause, every sentence, every emotional beat is placed like a chess piece in front of a global audience. And when Katt Williams stepped into that space, the entire energy shifted. For a brief moment, it wasn't comedy anymore. It wasn't entertainment. It was two ideologies colliding in real time. One represented rebellion, unfiltered, unpredictable, and fueled by resentment toward Hollywood's hidden rules. The other represented mastery of the system, knowing how to navigate it, benefit from it, and ultimately dominate it without openly breaking it. And the crowd didn't even realize it yet, but they weren't just watching a roast. They were watching a psychological test unfold in real time. The tension became even heavier when Katt finally spoke. His tone wasn't playful. It wasn't warm. It carried something sharper. Almost like every word had double meaning, one for the audience, and one aimed directly at Kevin Hart. Because Katt Williams has always spoken like someone who believes there are layers to everything. Layers the public doesn't see. Layers that exist behind contracts, behind smiles, behind industry success stories. So when he joked, when he paused, when he delivered lines that blurred the line between comedy and accusation, it didn't land like normal roasting. It landed like exposure. The audience laughed, but not fully. There was hesitation behind it. The kind of laughter people use when they're not sure if they're supposed to be comfortable or alert. And Kevin Hart noticed that. That's what most people miss in moments like this. The real battle isn't between two comedians. It's between narratives. Whoever controls how the moment is interpreted controls the aftermath. Then came the handshake moment. A simple gesture on the surface. Two men reconnecting. A symbolic closure to years of public tension. But in reality, nothing about it was simple. Katt Williams didn't rush into it. He didn't lean in with emotion. There was a pause, subtle, but heavy enough to feel like time itself slowed down for a second. And in that pause lived all the history between them. Every interview, every insult, every accusation. every viral clip that had defined their public feud. Then the handshake happened. And instantly, the world reacted. Some saw growth. Some saw maturity. Some saw resolution. But others saw something different entirely. They saw positioning. Because the moment you make peace in front of millions, you are no longer just resolving conflict, you are shaping perception. And perception in entertainment is currency. Kevin Hart understood that better than almost anyone in that room. That's why his response wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. He didn't just acknowledge Katt Williams. He elevated the moment. He turned it into a public reset. A visible turning point. Something that could be replayed, clipped, shared, and framed as unity. But Katt's expression didn't fully match that narrative. There was no full emotional release. No visible surrender to the moment. Instead, there was something more contained. More guarded. Like someone who knows they are participating in something bigger than what the surface is showing. And that's where Dave Chappelle comes in. Because while the entire audience reacted loudly, Chappelle's reaction was almost silent in comparison. Observational. Detached. Calculating. Not because he didn't understand the moment, but because he understood it too well. In Hollywood, veterans like Chappelle don't watch events like this the way fans do. They don't see jokes. They don't see reunions. They see structure, incentives, power dynamics. And what he saw wasn't just two comedians reconciling. He saw two narratives being rewritten at the exact same time. One narrative said, two rivals finally made peace. But another narrative, far less visible, suggested something else entirely. That the stage itself had become the negotiation table. Because in this industry, nothing that happens in front of cameras is ever fully disconnected from what happens behind them. Applause is not just applause. It's validation. A handshake is not just a handshake. It's messaging. And timing is never accidental. The deeper questions started forming in the background of the moment, even if no one said it out loud. Why no? After years of silence, tension, interviews, accusations, and public distance, why did this happen here, at this event, in this format, under these lights? And more importantly, who benefited most from it? Because in Hollywood, every resolution has a winner. Even when both sides smile. The audience, meanwhile, had no time to process the deeper layers. They were reacting in real time, sharing clips, posting opinions, instantly dividing into camps. Some praised Katt Williams for showing maturity. Others accused the moment of being performative. And some simply treated it as entertainment, not realizing they were witnessing a shift in narrative control. But underneath all of that noise, something more subtle was happening. The story was being rewritten in real time. Katt Williams, whether intentionally or not, had stepped into a space where his identity wasn't just defined by what he said anymore, but by how the public interpreted his presence next to Kevin Hart. And Kevin Hart, whether people admit it or not, is one of the most experienced figures in shaping those interpretations. That's what made the moment so complex. Because it wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about framing. And framing decides everything. As the stage lights continued to shine and the laughter slowly faded into applause, one thing became clear without anyone needing to say it directly. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a new version of the same story, one where the lines between rivalry, performance, truth, and strategy had become almost impossible to separate. And somewhere in that blurred space, the real answer was still hiding. Not in what was said, but in what was carefully left unsaid. The silence after the handshake didn't last long, but its impact lingered far beyond the stage. Because once the applause faded, what remained wasn't clarity, it was confusion. And confusion is where speculation thrives. Katt Williams had already turned to leave, and Kevin Hart was still standing at center stage, holding the moment like a producer who knew exactly when to cut a scene for maximum effect. But what happened next is where the narrative truly split into two completely different realities, depending on who was watching. Kevin didn't just smile and wave it off. He leaned into the microphone again. And in that instant, the tone of the entire night subtly shifted from reconciliation to interpretation. Because now, the story wasn't just about two comedians making peace. It was about who got to define what that peace meant. Kevin Hart's energy changed almost instantly. The softness from the handshake moment didn't fully disappear, but it got layered with something sharper underneath. A kind of controlled confidence that only appears when someone knows they have the final word in front of a live audience. And that's exactly what he delivered. A line that sounded like humor on the surface, but carried weight underneath. The audience laughed. They always do in moments like that. But laughter in these environments isn't always agreement. Sometimes it's just social reflex. People reacting to energy they don't fully understand yet. Because what Kevin had done wasn't just a joke. It was a reframing. A subtle repositioning of the entire moment so that it aligned more with his version of events than Katt Williams' history of claims and accusations. And that's where things get interesting. Because Katt Williams, even after leaving the stage, had not fully exited the narrative. In moments like this, physical absence doesn't equal narrative absence. In fact, sometimes leaving the stage makes you even more present in the public conversation. And that's exactly what happened. Clips started circulating almost instantly. The handshake, the hug, Kevin's response, Katt's expression. Every frame was being dissected in real time like evidence in a case that no one agreed on the charges for. Some viewers saw evolution. Others saw survival. And a smaller, more analytical group saw something else entirely. They saw strategy. Because what most people fail to understand about long-running public conflicts is that they rarely end in resolution. They end in repositioning. And this wasn't an exception. Katt Williams had walked into an environment that he had publicly criticized for years. A system he had labeled as controlled, manipulative, and selectively rewarding. Yet there he was inside it, participating in it, and more importantly, becoming part of its most viral moment. That contradiction alone became the center of online debate. But the deeper layer wasn't about hypocrisy. It was about necessity. Because in entertainment, isolation eventually becomes invisibility. And invisibility is more dangerous than criticism. Kevin Hart understood that long before this night. That's why his approach was never about avoiding the system. It was about mastering it. Learning how to operate inside it so effectively that even conflict becomes content. Katt Williams, on the other hand, built his identity on resistance to that same system. Which is why this moment felt so structurally significant. Because when resistance enters the system it once rejected, something has to shift. Either the system absorbs the resistance, or the resistance adapts. And nobody in that room could confidently say which one was happening in real time. Backstage, the atmosphere was different. No audience noise. No applause. Just production staff, movement, and the controlled chaos of a live broadcast winding down. But even there, people were aware that something unusual had just occurred. Not because of what was said, but because of how it would be interpreted afterward. That's the real currency in moments like these, post-event narrative control. And Kevin Hart has always been exceptionally aware of that. Meanwhile, Katt Williams' expression during exit moments became one of the most replayed visuals online. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was ambiguous. Ambiguity is dangerous in public perception. It allows people to project their own interpretation onto you. Some saw discomfort. Others saw calculation. A few even saw quiet satisfaction. But there was no consensus. And in the absence of clarity, the internet does what it always does, it fills in the gaps. The conversation quickly shifted from what happened to why it happened. Was this a forced reconciliation driven by industry pressure? Was there a contractual obligation tied to appearances and future specials? Or was it, as some insiders hinted, a mutual decision to reset public perception for long-term benefit? Each theory found its own audience. Each audience built its own version of truth. But the most compelling interpretation didn't focus on either man individually. It focused on timing. Because in entertainment, timing is rarely accidental. The decision to resolve a decade-long feud in front of a global live audience isn't something that happens casually. It's either emotional spontaneity on a rare scale, or calculated execution designed for maximum impact. And nothing about that night felt spontaneous. Even the pacing of the event suggested structure. The way introductions were made. The way tension was allowed to build. The way Katt Williams was brought in after. Anticipation had already peaked. It didn't feel like chaos. It felt like orchestration. And that's why Dave Chappelle's reaction became such a focal point afterward. Because unlike most of the audience, he wasn't reacting to emotion. He was reading structure. He wasn't consuming the moment. He was analyzing it. And what he saw, according to later interpretations of his demeanor, wasn't a simple reconciliation. It was a transaction. Not necessarily financial in a direct sense, but transactional in terms of value exchange. Visibility exchanged for validation. Tension exchanged for content. History exchanged for engagement. In that framing, nothing is purely emotional. Everything becomes functional, even forgiveness. And that's the uncomfortable part most audiences struggle with. Because people want conflict to end in sincerity. They want closure to feel clean. But in industries built on attention, closure is rarely clean. It's usually strategic. As the clips continued spreading, the narrative split widened even further. Katt Williams' supporters emphasized authenticity and survival against a system they believe he has consistently challenged. Kevin Hart's supporters highlighted professionalism, evolution, and emotional maturity in publicly resolving long-standing tension. But both sides were, in a way, reinforcing the same event from different emotional angles. And neither side could fully prove intent. That's what made the moment powerful. Not clarity, but ambiguity at scale. And in that ambiguity, both men achieved something rare. They dominated attention simultaneously. Because even disagreement keeps a story alive. And in the modern entertainment ecosystem, attention is the ultimate victory condition. By the time the night ended, the handshake had already transformed into something larger than itself. It was no longer just a gesture between two individuals. It had become a reference point, a clip, a debate, a symbol. And symbols are difficult to control once they leave the stage. For Katt Williams, the challenge moving forward wasn't just about public perception. It was about maintaining identity while operating inside a system that now had fresh footage of him participating in reconciliation with someone he had long positioned as a symbol of compromise. For Kevin Hart, the challenge was different. It was about sustaining the narrative advantage of having publicly extended peace while still maintaining authority in the ongoing interpretation of what that peace meant. And that is where the real conflict shifted, away from the stage, away from the handshake, and into the aftermath. Because in stories like this, the most important battle doesn't happen in front of cameras. It happens in the replay, in commentary, in interpretation, in the endless cycle of digital reanalysis, where every frame becomes evidence and every expression becomes meaning. And somewhere in that cycle, Dave Chappelle's silent smirk kept resurfacing. Not as a joke, but as a question. Was he witnessing reconciliation? Or was he watching two masters of perception briefly align their narratives for a moment neither fully controlled? And the answer, like everything else that night, depends entirely on who is telling the story. And that uncertainty is exactly why this moment didn't fade like a normal celebrity reconciliation. Instead, it kept expanding like a story that refused to settle into one version of truth. Because once the cameras stopped rolling, the real battle wasn't between Katt Williams and Kevin Hart anymore. It was between interpretations of what they had just done. Inside Hollywood circles, moments like this don't get analyzed as emotional events. They get analyzed as signals. And the signal this night sent was loud enough to echo across the entire entertainment ecosystem. Two men who had spent over a decade in open conflict just publicly shook hands on one of the most visible comedy stages in the world. That alone changes positioning. It resets conversations. It rewrites search trends, interview questions, and audience expectations. But the deeper question remained unanswered. Was this closure or calibration? Because when you strip away the applause, what you're left with is a structure that looks almost too perfect. A long-standing feud. A surprise stage appearance. A carefully built tension arc. A handshake at peak emotional intensity. And then an immediate counter-narrative from Kevin Hart that reframed the meaning of the moment before the audience even had time to process it. That sequence doesn't feel accidental. It feels engineered for maximum cultural penetration. And that's why analysts, comedians, and industry observers all started breaking it down differently within hours. Some saw Katt Williams as someone stepping into a larger platform, using visibility to reinsert himself into mainstream relevance. Others saw Kevin Hart as someone reinforcing dominance, not through aggression, but through timing and narrative control. Because Kevin didn't chase Katt off stage with anger. He waited. And that waiting is important. In performance psychology, timing is power. Whoever speaks last often controls emotional residue. And Kevin Hart understood that the final emotional imprint of the night would matter more than the handshake itself. So when he took the microphone again, he didn't just respond. He redefined. He turned ambiguity into interpretation, and interpretation into content. Meanwhile, Katt Williams' silence after leaving the stage became just as powerful as anything he said while on it. Because silence in a viral moment doesn't stay empty, it gets filled by everyone watching. Fans filled it with admiration. Critics filled it with suspicion. Industry observers filled it with strategic speculation. But Katt himself gave no immediate clarification. And that decision, whether intentional or not, allowed the narrative to remain open-ended, which, in modern media ecosystems, is often more valuable than resolution. Because unresolved stories don't end. They circulate. They evolve. They generate engagement long after the actual event is over. And that's exactly what happened here. Clips of the handshake were replayed millions of times, each time slightly reinterpreted depending on context, commentary, and audience bias. Slow-motion breakdowns focused on facial expressions. Frame-by-frame analyses tried to decode intent. Even body language experts entered the conversation, assigning meaning to micro-movements that may or may not have had any conscious intent behind them. But beneath all of that analysis was a much simpler truth. Nobody outside that stage actually knew what the agreement between them meant. And that uncertainty is where power lives. Because whoever defines meaning after the fact controls the legacy of the moment. Kevin Hart's post-handshake comments leaned into humor, but humor in this context wasn't just comedy, it was framing. It allowed him to soften perception while simultaneously reinforcing his position as the one steering the narrative forward. Katt Williams, by contrast, left people with contrast instead of clarity. And contrast is emotionally powerful, but strategically vulnerable. It allows others to fill in the missing structure, which is exactly what happened. The internet didn't just react to the event, it constructed it. And once construction begins at that scale, original intent becomes almost irrelevant. What matters is perception velocity, how fast the narrative spreads, how deeply it embeds, how long it stays relevant. And in this case, it stayed relevant because it had all the ingredients of a cultural fault line. Power versus resistance. Control versus authenticity. Industry system versus outsider ideology. Even the presence of Dave Chappelle added another layer to that structure. Because Chappelle occupies a rare position in entertainment, someone who has both benefited from and resisted the system at different stages of his career. So when he smirked instead of celebrating, it wasn't interpreted as neutrality. It was interpreted as recognition. Recognition of pattern. Recognition of structure. Recognition of something repeating in a slightly different form. And that's where the deeper theory behind the entire moment begins to take shape. Maybe this wasn't about reconciliation at all. Maybe it was about access. Access to platforms. Access to audiences. Access to narratives that can't be reached from the outside. In that interpretation, Katt Williams stepping onto that stage isn't surrender, it's infiltration. And Kevin Hart extending the handshake isn't weakness, it's strategic containment. Both actions can exist simultaneously without canceling each other out. And that's what makes the situation so complex. Because multiple truths can exist in entertainment at the same time. A moment can be emotional and strategic, authentic and performative, spontaneous and structured. And the audience, watching from the outside, is forced to choose which version they believe. But belief doesn't change what actually happened. It only changes how it is remembered. And memory is what becomes legacy. In the days following the event, neither man fully clarified the deeper intent behind the moment. No definitive explanation was given. No full breakdown was released. Just fragments, quotes, reactions, short interviews, each reinforcing slightly different angles of the same night, which only kept the conversation alive longer. Because clarity ends discussions, ambiguity extends them. And in the modern entertainment economy, extension equals value. The longer people talk about something, the more powerful it becomes in cultural memory. That's why this moment didn't fade into typical celebrity news cycles. It stayed active. It stayed debated. It stayed alive. And every new discussion added another layer of interpretation on top of the original footage. Over time, the handshake became less about two individuals and more about what they represent. Katt Williams became a symbol of resistance, trying to operate inside a system he has long criticized. Hart became a symbol of mastery within that system, demonstrating how influence can be maintained even in moments of apparent vulnerability. And Dave Chappelle became the observer archetype, the figure who sees through both performance and reaction without fully committing to either side. Which brings everything back to the original question. Was it forgiveness? Or was it strategy? The uncomfortable answer is that it doesn't fully have to be one or the other.